So good morning, everyone. Welcome to DDD Perth. It's certainly nice to visit this part of the country. I try and get over here a few times a year, but a conference like this is really good. Today we're going to talk about Raspberry Pi and Internet of Things. But here's my problem so far. We all enjoyed the keynote, and how am I supposed to follow a dynamic presentation like that? So it's going to go downhill from here. It's got to happen. What we're going to do first is just acknowledge the sponsors for the event, in particular the Platinum Partners, so Bank West and Microsoft and Guru. I actually had to check, make sure I was saying that properly earlier, because without those guys, events like this can't happen. But more importantly, thank you to you guys, because there's no point having great sponsors if people don't turn up. So you guys need a big round of applause as well. Sponsorship's one thing. The most important part of the day is the after party. And DevExpress are proud to be supporting that after party. I'm not sure how many people can get to it, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And we've got some giveaways. So my talk today doesn't include anything about DevExpress, but if anybody has any questions, I'll be around all day and more than happy to answer things, just not for the next 40 minutes. And I figured this was typical developer in a party mode. Quick intro to myself. I'm Paul Usher. I've been a technical evangelist for DevExpress for 4 years now. Before that, ran and still owned a software company in Brisbane. I've been a developer for over 26 years, which makes me feel really, really old. I'm a Microsoft Azure Mvp, Azure, whichever way you want to say it. I've been that now for 2 years, and that's pretty exciting. Anybody that wants information on the MVP program, rule number 1 is buy a lot more hard drive space for emails. I'm also a trainer with Winselect now on different technologies, in particular mobile, things like iOS. So in my development career, I've tried to focus a lot on mobile development. To humanize the whole thing, because it's one thing for guys to stand up here and talk about certain technologies, I've been married for 18 years and I'm father of 5, and I'm also the president of a local brass band. So, life can be quite busy when you're traveling and fitting all those things in. Thankfully, all my children are now adults, which again makes me feel really old. Today's agenda, we're going to have a quick look at what IoT actually means, and then start talking about things like the Raspberry Pi and how it can be used with IoT. We'll talk about some practical projects, and then how you can actually get started. And then I've got some links which are useful resources. And then we can open up to questions as long as you promise to be nice. When the actual talk was accepted, it started me thinking, what's the goal for a room full of people that have come in, given up their Saturday, what's the takeaway? My number one goal is to leave you with a piqued interest that you will actually want to go away and start looking at IoT, and in particular Raspberry Pi, or any of the other devices that connect to IoT. For me, it was one thing to go and buy a Raspberry Pi. I bought my first one in the UK probably 5 years ago now, and it sat on my shelf. I showed everybody, look, I've got a Raspberry Pi. Yeah, for 3 years I didn't boot it. It was just like, I've got a Raspberry Pi. So it's one of those things quite often we want to look at technologies, we want to start playing with things, but sometimes you just buy it, put it on the shelf, oh, I'll get to it. So I want to change, if you've got that sort of philosophy, I want to change that today. And the second part of my goal was, because of the coolness of the technology, somebody's going to come up with $1 million idea and retire. I take donations if that happens. Okay? Bitcoin, PayPal, any of those things work. So what is the Internet of Things? And I thought maybe the easiest way to talk about what it is what it's not. The IoT is not a ubiquitous or pervasive computing method. It's not a protocol. IoT is not a communication technology or an embedded device or group of devices per se, and it's not the applications. By its actual definition, the Internet of Things is a global network infrastructure linking physical and virtual objects using cloud computing, data capture, and network communications. It allows devices to communicate with each other, access information on the internet, store and retrieve data, and then interact with users, creating a smart, pervasive, and always connected infrastructure. Now, when we talk about accessing information on the network. We're not just talking about physical devices, working with relays, buttons, those sorts of things. It can also be information like tweets. So having an IoT infrastructure, you can have the lights turn on because somebody mentioned something in a tweet. So you've got to think big picture with these things. Or you can do small projects. But the point is, there's so many moving parts to IoT. He mentioned cloud computing. Now, obviously, as a Microsoft Azure MVP, I'm going to mention Azure. I get my extra points that way. For those, a quick show of hands, who's played around with Azure? AWS? So, pretty balanced. I'm a big fan of Azure. If you haven't already got an account, you can get a free one. And a lot of people tend to think that cloud computing has to cost a lot of money. Let's just get to the right pages. I couldn't risk you guys stealing all the bandwidth, so I'm working on a shared device somewhere. Anything can happen. Okay, so once you sign up for Azure, you create your account. It's really simple to deploy a IoT hub. And in fact, you get started, you click on, is that readable? But there's a simple thing, IoT hub, and you can deploy. And that starts setting up your endpoints. Now, I'm not going to go into too much technical depth here. Time is too short, but one of the local MVPs, Martin Abbott, wrote a really good article about setting up Azure and IoT. So I've got links for these things later on as well. But at his blog post, so martinabbott.azurewebsites.net, he details a talk that he did in a local computer group, how to deploy, what's involved, what you need to do to set up your device. We're going to cover some of this in today's session. And then he set up a sprinkler system connected to Azure, etc. So there's certainly a lot of information and ways that you can start doing that inside Azure. So what about the Raspberry Pi? Well, over the years, there was a big fanfare to start with. This little company or this organization invented a small powered, cheap PC. Again, what we'll do is start with what the Raspberry Pi is not. And it's not an Arduino. And some people sort of say, well, the two are the same thing. You've got this little Arduino device, little board, and you've got a Raspberry Pi. What's the difference? I'm hoping, this is Fred, this is my robot. Unfortunately, Fred had a bit of an accident recently. He fell off the desk, and so he's very delicate right now. Fred is built on an Arduino board. Okay, so at the bottom here, we've got an Arduino board controlling a series of motors. And Fred's normal job, don't lose your head yet, is to control or to tell me what's happening in my security system. So Fred sits on my desk. Anything happens at home with my home automation, which is connected with IoT, etc., Fred will actually tell me. He moves his head, and we're going to try. Let's say he almost didn't make it all the way over here, but make sure that Fred can talk. So, and I simply want to use it as a quick example of the use of the Arduino. And then I'm going to explain some of what happens with the Arduino boards. He has a nervous tick right now. Okay, so this is some of the software that is created for teaching children robotics. And I just want to run up one particular program. And this is just straight USB connection serial controlling that Arduino device. And as I move the mouse around, there we go. This is usually where his head falls off right now. But, yeah, are you going to talk to people? Yeah? Okay, good. Well, one thing that did break was his little speaker, so, oh, there we go, lost his head. But it is a great example of what can be achieved with the Arduino microprocessor. Okay, good night. There we go. So what's the difference between the Arduino, or let's for a second talk more about the Arduino and explain what it is. The Arduino is an open source prototyping platform based on an easy to use hardware and software. Easy to use being the fact that it's one simple board with some input-output pins. Now, those boards are able to read inputs, whether it be from sensors, fingers on buttons, everything, including, because we're hooking up to IoT, things like Twitter messages or other incoming sources. And then once it takes that input, it can actually do something with it, being the output. So you can control the motors, the servos, lights, other things. With the Arduino, it's based on their own programming language, and they've got their own ID, etc. Really cheap to get into and cool. But at the end of the day, there's Fred with a nose. My Fred's noseless too. At the end of the day, how does that differ to the Pi? And why do I prefer working with a Pi? So the Arduino being a microcontroller is a simple computer. It can only run one program at one time over and over and over. It's very easy to use, simple to set up and fun to play with. Whereas the Pi is a general purpose computer, usually with a Linux operating system, although that's now changing, and it's capable of running multiple programs, therefore making it a more complicated or complex beast in the Arduino. So enter the Pi. Now this one here is actually the Pi 3 that we're going to be giving away in the starter kit today. If I just take the little top off, we can see that it is a credit card sized machine. I'm going to break down the anatomy shortly on the slide as well, but it's a simple little device. This is an official Pi case, wraps it up nicely, and being low powered, it means that you can run it really easily with other things. Doesn't have to be plugged into the mains all the time. But what's really interesting about it are all the different slots and devices. It's capable of some quite amazing things. It runs a version of Linux. So this here is actually a Raspberry Pi. The case itself is designed by a British company called Iot, and they wanted to give you a way of working with a Pi, because most Pis sit on the shelf. You've got to hook up a power supply, you've got to find a HDMI cable, display, etc. They come up with the idea that, you know what, how much more use can you get if it's self-contained? Now we've got the Raspberry Pi sitting here, we've got the battery behind, keyboard, mouse. This is running Raspbian, which is the preferred default operating system for it. And I've also got, as well as the controller, something called the Iot expansion board, which allows me to play around with electronics, and very much in the same way we can do with the Arduino. One point to note, do not take a Pi top and the bag of electronics on an aeroplane and try and write the presentation. It doesn't go down very well. People start freaking out when you're pulling cables and LEDs and start doing this on a plane. So it's like, okay, learn that lesson the hard way. Thankfully it was a domestic, not international flight, otherwise I might not be here anyway. What's really cool with this particular setup that I like, as well as obviously being portable, I can pull the SD card out and put another operating system in there. In fact, the one that's on here is running 3 operating systems. So one of the cool things with the Raspberry Pi, I can use it as a desktop computer, word processing, spreadsheets, browser, etc. Or I could use it as a media center. And one of the distros I've got on the card allows me to have a, not so much in this setup, but you imagine just a little box, a really silent media center running what I want. So lots of different uses, and we'll talk about some more of that shortly. We'll come back to this device because we've got it set up to do some programming as well. Now at the same time, the Pi can also be used, well, first of all, when the Raspberry Pi Foundation started, they set up with a goal. It was actually designed so that they could see children all over the world learning to program on a device that was cheap, so therefore affordable. Now, apparently there is a world shortage of programmers. Obviously not in Perth, because lots of people here. But that new generation of children coming through, there's lots of programs being written, and programs as in teaching, not software, to educate children on the joys of software development. I mean, everybody here does it for passion. You don't do it just because you need to get paid, right? At the end of the day, we're a special bunch. We take an idea of nothing and create something from it. So, interestingly, watching the keynote, and I was in real estate back in 2002. I was doing software development in a building company, and I actually came up with two concepts that we wanted to do inside that company. One was holographic display of brand new houses on flat pieces of land, so people could see what their new house was going to look like. And the second was an automated bricklaying machine. At the time, I was told by my partners, don't be stupid, it can never happen. HoloLens and other technologies mean that people can now stand in front of their newly purchased piece of land and have a look at what that house design is going to be like that. And we're talking 10 plus years. And recently I learned that the company has actually released an automatic bricklaying machine. So neither of those I managed to patent, and so I'm still here. The anatomy of a Pi runs on a Broadcom quad-core CPU. This is the current model, the Pi 3 Model B. You can see that it's got onboard Bluetooth, onboard Wi-Fi. The micro SD card slot is where the operating system and file storage runs from. It's got a display port. One of my setups actually has a 7-inch touch screen display, which is great for in-car audio or other adaptive things mounted on a wall. The micro USB, the full-size HDMI video output. It's got a camera port. Now, I can turn this is fun, by the way. If you want to set up a Raspberry Pi and have it portable, there's a little battery-operated projector with keyboard and mouse. And I can't unplug this now, but this is a Raspberry Pi 3 that this little thing controls. Now once it's booted, this one's running Windows 10 IoT Core. Okay? Once it's actually booted, I can now control it from any of my other devices. But this one's got an 8 megapixel camera in it. It's using a package called a Pi Blocks, which are stackable Lego style boxes. And this is part of my security setup. So it can sit on a shelf, low power, and take photos when I want, mounted in the office, etc. So we're talking devices that cost $50, $20 for a camera. And you've got a fully fledged computer with a lot of capability. We've also got 4 USB ports, the Ethernet port, and the extended GPIO bridge for controlling other devices. So what about operating systems? Well, first and foremost, people work with Linux. There's Raspberry, and when I was doing some research, there's like 28 plus versions of Linux available for the Pi. One company released recently a NAS RAID system version of the OS, so that basically put your SD card in, have a stack of drives, low-powered, portable drives, whatever, and you've got a network storage solution that is super cheap, and it can be set up in RAID. So again, whether it be something, an office project, home project, imagine that with a media center. Pi to run your media center, Pi running as a NAS RAID server, and you've got things that previously were quite expensive. I'm running Windows 10 IoT Core on this one, and that's a lot of fun, and we're going to have a look at some different projects for that. I was reading recently as well that Google are talking about releasing a version of Android dedicated for the Pi, which is quite exciting. There are some hacks you can do now and actually get Android running on it, but we're talking about a dedicated version of Android. So that will open things up interestingly as well. I'm not sure if Apple want to do that though. I think they've got a super expensive one called an Apple TV, right? So what about real-world projects? One of the first things that Pi owners tend to try and play with, especially if they've got a bit of handyman work in them, is a smart mirror. And it's such an interesting concept. You buy a couple of pieces of mirror, usually the acrylic one, so you can shape it better rather than glass. You buy a cheap monitor, and you mount the mirror on top of the monitor, and you mount the Raspberry Pi onto that. Hook it up, it's got Wi-Fi anyway, and you've got a smart mirror. So those times where we've seen those movies, and the guy's looking, having his shave on a morning, or the ladies are getting ready, and you can actually be looking at your Twitter feed, you can look at your emails, you can do other things. Certain companies have gone further and put camera interaction with it so that they can get feedback and they can talk to the UI in that way. Or, simply enough, have that sitting next to the sink and go to the next page, do other things. So there's so many different options there. Another gentleman in Ireland came up with the idea of building a camera rig that was the Raspberry Pi controlling the runners and also the caption. He was doing delayed caption shots, so that was another way of doing it. Lots of different ideas. In fact, smart mirrors, media centers, the NAS servers, just a standard server, sprinkler control system, home automation. The only thing that limits what you can do with a Pi is going to be your thinking. So then how do you actually get started with developing for the Pi? You've got to think about what operating system you want. What do you actually want to achieve with it? If you talk about Windows 10 and IoT Core, once you boot the device, it's a device, you can control it, but it's not the same as running Linux on it. So it's not Windows 10 that you can run software and do things, it's just the core libraries with a browser interface, as we saw. What I'm going to do is step you through what's actually involved in building a Windows 10 Pi, and then how you can connect to it and do other cool things. Hopefully the resolution is okay. So there's an application called the Iot Dashboard. If you've actually got any devices running a network, you can administer them directly through this. Now there's a couple of different downloadable products for looking at your devices. This one is one of the latest ones from Microsoft. It also allows you to do the setup. We can see that right now I've got DevPi and it's on the same shared network, which is a challenge when you're on mobile. And if I double click, I can change settings here, or I can actually open the device in the browser. What's really nice with IoT 10 Core, Windows IoT 10 Core, is the fact that you can run any UWP application on it. So if you've got Visual Studio and you install the Windows 10 SDKs, you just open up a new Universal Windows Platform project and you can deploy that project straight to your device. Obviously, you may want some UI, which is fine because it's got the HDMI, or if you're talking to other devices, you can just have it talk to the devices. But it's that simple. Visual Studio, SDK, and you can connect. Now, there is a great sample tutorial on the Microsoft website, which talks about, and again, I'll post these links, but it talks about how to create a C# project, steps you through everything you need to do, how to set up your XAML, how to do the deployment and debugging. So it's a great resource to start with. Very simple to get up to speed with. What you'll notice here, that's going to work good, is inside this dashboard, we've got access to the device itself. So now once it's booted, I'm happy, I can come through, I can look at what apps are installed, I can install new apps, I can traverse the file explorer, I can look at the processes, I can see how it's performing, and you can see this is in real time. This is the blue little device here. If I unplug it, the screen goes blank. You can see how the RAM is performing. Everything down to controlling what Bluetooth audio is set up on there. You can run the Windows updates. Word of warning, it does take a long time for Windows 10 to update. If you thought it was hard on the laptop, I think it was an hour and a half the other day for the latest update. So it downloads it, and then you just sit watching the little cogs go round and round and round. So always have something else to do. You can also access it with RDP. So once the device or range of devices are booted, it makes it really, really easy to work with. Safari wants to access things, no. Now, zoom out, okay. So if you're a quick show of hands, C# developers or Microsoft Stack versus Linux, other, okay, fairly balanced. If you want to go down the C# path, Visual Studio, that's great. If you're more of a Linux guy, depends again what you want to do. I love the fact that this little $50 computer I can sit with, and I can actually use some of the inbuilt IDEs in here. So there's Blue Java, Greenfoot, there's Python IDEs, all part of that distro. I just get to sit and write code if I want. And that's cool if I'm talking about doing some little apps on the actual running Linux. But as far as IoT, one of my favorite products for working with IoT has got to be Node-RED. Now what I'm going to try and do here, and this could go terribly wrong, is swap this to that screen. So just bear with me a second. Try not to kill the robot in the meantime. Just depends whether this adapter's a good size. Everybody's at the back saying, no, don't do it. It's probably not going to fit. Okay. I'll talk you through Node-RED, and I'll hold the screen up so you can see it. Just unfortunately won't be on the projector. So Node-RED is a graphical interface for controlling IoT devices. It's got to be one of the simplest ways to get your head around talking to external components. Because sometimes as developers we think, oh, it'd be cool to make the motor move, to run a test from a sensor, to do something else, but we're not really interested in getting into a lot of the down and dirty bits of electronics. So with Node-RED, you've got a group of inputs on this left-hand side here. It's built on top of a Node.js server, so nice and easy to deploy. And you basically just drag the nodes that you want onto the page. Okay, so nice and straightforward. You've got inputs and outputs. That's what it's all about. Here what I've done is set up a Twitter input feed. And I've said to it that anything to do with DDD Perth, so it's connected to my Twitter account, public tweets, if it has DDD Perth in it, I want to know about it. Now at the moment all I've got running is the debug window, but can somebody, let's just trash that, can somebody send a tweet to DDD Perth? This is where 500 people start tweeting. And what we should see in real time, we will. The Twitter API, interestingly, won't feed everything into it, but there we go. Testing at DX Australia, nice. Rob Moore. So there you go. It's taking from that Node server, it's reading those those tweets, and then it's allowing me to do something with it. Now, doing something with it, I could, with a drag, hook up a MongoDB. Zero code. Just configure my settings, and then say, store those tweets. I could say, if somebody tweets, it's raining in Brisbane, that I want it to close my windows or bring the automatic blinds down, whatever. It's such a powerful interface when it comes to designing IoT and connected devices and different things you want to go with it. So out of all the different platforms I've played with, this is by far the quickest to get things up and running. What about deploying or setting up your Pi for the first time? Well, if we go back quickly to Windows and the Windows software, the Iot Dashboard, you get your Raspberry Pi. Whoever wins this, you can do this with just flash your SD card and have a crack. Setting up a new device is simply a matter of picking what IoT board you want to work with. So Windows 10 IoT supports the Minnow board, Raspberry Pi 2 and 3, and the Dragon board at the moment. What was nice is the latest version actually gave us Wi-Fi support, because that was a bit of a pain. The device has Wi-Fi, but Windows 10 didn't support it. You pick the build you want, and if you're a member of the Insider Preview, you can get the latest version of that. And then you simply pick which device you want. So in the Mac here, I've got an SD card plugged in the side. It says, okay, we've got one. Give it a name. Give it an admin password, secret squirrel, and accept. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter how many times you've already downloaded it, it goes off to the internet and downloads 600 meg file and then flashes a drive and we'll set it up. Now, as soon as that has been set up, it then shows up inside here, which is really cool. So it boots and away we go. There's some great samples, actually, again, on the Microsoft site, hooking up a Pi to control a 3D printer, turning your Pi into an internet radio that can be consumed by anybody in that range, or how to use some basic Scratch-style blocky programming languages. If I was setting up a Pi for the Linux version, simple matter of downloading Noobs. Now, Noobs is new out-of-box software. Who would have thought? And that will again take care of flashing the drive and give you the distros you want to include. So the media ones, the different versions of Linux that are available. And I'm just going to quickly boot before we take questions. This one up to show you what happens if you're running multiple distros. Get a pretty pattern in the meantime. Linux boot, you get the options, and then here we can see I've got Raspberry, I've got OpenELEC, which is a Codo Entertainment Center distribution, another Media Center, and Windows i10 Core. So even on that little 32 gig card, there's plenty of options to play with. I'm being told from the back that we're running short on time, so let's have some questions, and hopefully there's been enough interest peaked in our short time together to make you want to go off and at least win one, the after party, or come back and do some more stuff with it. Questions? Yes?
Could you just, you've already sort of talked about a couple of things you've done at home, but just really quickly, what have you done that's exciting?
Well, exciting is like beauty, it's the beholder. So, home automation. My door locks are all hooked up to IoT. So I can unlock locked doors, can see the status of my doors. I've got my media center set up with Raspberry Pi. I love playing with some of the Arduinos as well, so I've got Raspberry Pi controlling some Arduino stuff. The water tester for my turtle tanks. So I've got a sensor which helps monitor water level, water temperature, and so I get notifications via Azure, via the notification hub to say, hey, you need to, the pump's gone off on the tank, or the water level's low, or the heater's off because the water's too cold. I love my turtles. I particularly love the home automation, like even the door locking. So on my phone, I can say, hey Siri, unlock my front door as I'm driving up the driveway, and if she's being nice, she'll do that. Otherwise, I've got apps, etc. I can do. Don't let your thinking limit what can be done. Martin Abbott did the sprinkler system. I know guys that put sensors on fans on air conditioning units to make sure that the fan hasn't sort of slowed down. Fire alarms. Just start thinking. Think big picture. What is it that you do every day that could be automated? Justin King out of Sydney has might be Justin somebody else, but it's so that he's got a GPS sensor on a device on his bike that as he's getting towards his house, the garage door goes up, so that he doesn't even have, because pressing a button takes too long now. So as he's driving towards his house, garage door, this stuff. So lots of different ideas. I'm a big, especially with Node-RED, it is so easy to set that stuff up and push stuff out to new web pages, file it inside Mongo, like so much power.
With all the stuff you're adding, do you ever worry about the security goals that are going to crop up along with that?
If I was to stand and worry about all the different security aspects, I'd probably stay in bed all day. I mean, let's look, FBI monitor every email we ever send. Facebook is owned by the CIA, So, but yeah, I mean, there are security concerns, but just this week, there's a 0-day bug with iOS that your machine can be jailbroken with one click. So it's be sensible with it. For me, if somebody tries to break into my house, I'm going to know. Does that mean that somebody can hack my locks? Well, they can bust a window anyway. Like, really, if they want to get in, they're going to get in. So I just love playing with that stuff. It's cool when people come over, you go, screen comes down, projector comes up, that sort of thing. And it's cheap. It used to be you spend a lot of money with high-end technology like the AMX gear and things like that. Now you can do it with a $50 computer. Last question.
What's the preference between Windows 10 IoT and Raspberry in terms of?
Oh, we're out of time. Look, I'm a Microsoft guy through and through, apart from when I'm doing iOS stuff. But so I do prefer now the IoT 10 core with that. For this stuff, playing around, just sitting on the lounge, doing cool shit, then Raspberry is my OS of choice. Okay, hopefully you can all take something away from that, and thank you very much. And of course, some useful links, which I'll make available publicly. The Pi Shop is a great place to buy a lot of stuff. Brisbane-based, but they ship all over the country. My contact details, love tweets, love feedback. Don't forget to fill in your feedback forms to go in for all the other things. And of course, thank you to the sponsors.